Start it up. All right, so it's recording now, and we are going to go into week 3 now. I told you at the beginning of the semester, but I may mention it offhand, that this was right now it's mostly just a copy from the last semester. I didn't even teach it last semester. And due to our schedule, we're going in a little bit different pace. So each of the weeks will only be final the week of the class. So I did make more changes, for example, this week than I did last week, yesterday before class. Okay? So if you downloaded some stuff or started working on a lab, hopefully you didn't do that, then it would be more different. So this week's lab last week it was more similar to the way it had been taught in the past. We moved at a slightly different pace. And so it's a little different what we're gonna actually do this week for the lab. So what's up there now is current. That's the final message. We're gonna do in the lecture part for the first little while. Hopefully we can get through all this. We're gonna talk about data models. It's been as a little bit of a review because we did talk about that the first day, and then most of it we're going to talk about data entry. And really for the next 3 or 4 meetings, we're talking about getting GIS data spatial data into our GIS systems. That's what we're going to talk about. So today we're going to talk about kind of manual ways to do that. It's probably best to talk about that. How to enter the data in, both the spatial and the attribute data. One of the ways that we refer to that as is digitizing. So that's what we're going to do in the lab, is practice digitizing. So in a nutshell, basically we're talking about having some geographic data that exists, whether it's like a map that exists, a paper map, or an image of an area, and just tracing it. Simply what we're talking about, but it's a little more complex than that. But that's what we're going to spend this part of the lecture on. Okay. And then in the coming weeks, we'll talk about a few more things. The global positioning system is something that we've all used, right? You've seen your little dot show up. Well, we need to learn about the global positioning system because it's actually a very effective way to get data into a GIS system. We can physically travel to the things that we're trying to input into the system, collect a GPS point, and then somehow transfer that to the computer. Okay? I think that's next week. Then today we're going to talk about drawing pictures from images, but we also have to talk about where those images come from. We'll briefly introduce data collecting through imagery, or remote sensing is what it's often called. But we actually have a whole course in that area, and so you could take that course as well. We'll briefly introduce that. Then we talk about just gathering additional data, because sometimes as GIS specialists, we use data that already exists. We just need to get it. Because the government agencies create a lot of data, so they get data from or federal government. Like census data, for example, so we can get that data. Federal government creates other sorts of data. State governments create data. And so we spend some time talking about all the available sources of data. And I think I've covered it fairly well, but in case I miss anything, we'll go through it from week to week. So that's what we're going to do for the next few weeks, getting data into the system. And depending on who you are, I'm just talking from my own personal perspective, maybe that's still a little more boring, let's say, than something that is actually analysis. Okay? I could see how somebody could make that argument. It's still something you got to know, but it's not quite as exciting as what we'll talk about when we get into analysis. I wouldn't say it's boring, but. Like I said, we're gonna go through this fairly quickly, this first part fairly quickly, but is a little bit of a review. data models. So data models, if you remember, the reason that we need data models is that we need to convert from the complex world. Here's an example of a picture of the real world, to the railroad track. We don't need to store all the information about every rock, every road, or every fence post, but we might. Depends on what the answer is that we're trying to get. But you can see on this map that's been produced, there are some things, like there's this railroad, okay? There's the regular street. So that information was extracted out of the world, taken and stored in a computer system. That computer system was then used to render this map. And even some buildings, like this is a building, that's a building, that's what those purple things are. This purple thing is a building, it's an intermittent pond. Oops. Okay. This is probably a better way to advance here. The what button? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's what I thought I did. Oh, it's just like delayed. It's a little bit shorter than normal. Okay. So next, back. It's still not perfect because it's like going a little bit funny. Of course, maybe if I hit this full screen button, that'll solve that problem. A little bit. Okay. So yeah, we're here on the second slide, and you've now had the opportunity to see this. For every feature that we capture from the real world, in a GIS system, we need to have some attribute information about it. The what information, the attribute data. So those are paired up together. And then I introduced this concept on the first day that we met. Really, there's two main data models. One of them is the raster data model. One of them is the vector data model. And the vector data model underneath has a few specifics. You don't need to memorize these for now, but just know that they exist. That it's not just one way. In practice, the vector data model means that the world is made up of point locations, and those point locations can be connected together to make lines, or they can be connected together to make polygons. So the world is made up of points, lines, and polygons, and these entities, whether they're points or lines or polygons, can have attributes attached to them. Like if you go back to this map for a second, these are lines, and each individual line, like for example, this line is highlighted. That line has these attributes. It's a road, it has this name, it has this number associated with it. And that's the vector data model. The raster data model, on the other hand, looks like this, where every single location in the world has a number associated with it. And that's the attribute. So we don't have multiple attributes in one single layer. We just have an attribute that represents the value for that layer. Now, when I say every single location, you see that I could modify the size of those blocks. So what if the size of those blocks in real life were 90 meter by 90 meters, and the value in the center represented the elevation? Well, it must represent the average elevation, or the elevation right in the center, or something. In any case, it's a proxy for the real value, whatever that value is. It's not one single real value, because it's a 90 by 90 meter square. If I have smaller cells, what happens? I'm more accurate, right? More accuracy, but also more data. So that's the raster data model, a regular subdivision of space. Sometimes we refer to that as a tessellation. 99% of the time in practice, there's squares, because squares are really easy for computers to deal with. So each cell contains one value. Really, this is the same data model that pictures are stored in. So for imagery, the value is the reflected light from the surface. For elevation, it could represent the actual elevation value. Smaller cell size, improved resolution, spatial resolution technically. So that's different than this vector data model. Vector data, raster data. We can have both. Most GIS systems are just fine with both. And there are some advantages and disadvantages to each. So here's an image. We zoom down in. It makes sense that the image gets more grainy. Larger cells. They're not really larger. We're just looking at we're just looking closer at the values. All right. Now we can convert back and forth between the two. And if we do that, recognize that something like a road isn't going to look right. Unless we get very small cells, but then we have a very large file. The smaller these get. Okay. Talked about this a little bit the first day. Well, we talked about it a fair bit. So a few terminology that I forgot I didn't bring up the first day. Okay. Points are what we refer to as zero dimensions. Why are they zero dimensions? Because they're only a location. They don't take up any space technically. A point doesn't take up any space. So you could actually have an attribute that would imply that it takes up space, like length or size. Like let's say each point represents a fire hydrant. We can have an attribute that represents size of the pipe that goes down in there. But still, the point itself doesn't take up any space. So points are zero dimensions, lines are one dimension, areas are two-dimensional. And something about GIS systems is that typically that's where we end. Okay? We're talking about mapping, looking straight down. But more and more GIS systems are trying to account for a third dimension, volume. All right, so here's the vector data model. This is what we're going to be doing in class today, is actually doing something that looks a lot like this. We'll have an image, and we're going to have to draw these lines on top of the imagery. This might seem a little tedious, but there's always slightly tedious jobs associated with things that you do. Getting data into a system, this seems like a job for like a prison convict or something, or a third grader drawing lines on a map. But you're creating geographic data when you do that, and that's not the exciting part of what we do. All right. So the vector data model, when I said, there's three different types there. There's topology, there's spaghetti, and there's the tin. Well, the tin is something we'll talk about later. But basically, there's two different ways to store data if you think about polygons. One way is to store common boundaries only once, and to actually let the computer know that that's a common boundary, and that it is a boundary that is for both polygon B and polygon D. The advantage of this is when you go to change this line, it will modify both B and D. Okay? Sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes it's not what you want. But this is an older data model, as I mentioned the first time we met. Okay? However, it has more advantages because it allows for common data lines to only be introduced once, and it's easier for editing. So it's used a lot in big government It's used a lot in big government operations like land parcels. There's nowhere where there's no land that's not owned by somebody. So, whether it's the federal government or you or whatever. So if you sell something off, okay, we want to be able to adjust this line and make it so that now D is in B. With the newer cartographic spaghetti data model, which is what a shapefile, so you're going to be creating shapefiles today. Shapefile uses, you have to adjust, this line is stored independently because this polygon is stored as one polygon, and this polygon is stored as another polygon. So when you move that line, you don't also move the line that's associated. If you move D's boundary, you also have to move B's boundary. Now, there's some software methods to overcome that. So sometimes you can get the computer to handle that and say, okay, go ahead and move the neighboring polygon, and everything will be okay. All right? And so that gets done a lot. And you're going to experiment with that today when you digitize. You're going to move boundaries around and see what I'm talking about here. Okay. Now, when we talk about points, lines, and polygons, that's how they're stored on the computer. How they're symbolized is another matter, okay, the visual appearance of your data. This is particularly true with points. Okay? When you display them on your screen or on a map, when you make a hard copy map, you get to choose what that point looks like. And at that point, the point no longer is 0 dimensions. I mean, it has a shape associated with it. On disk, it's still 0 dimensions, but you're displaying it as something different. Okay, the visual appearance of your data. All right, so here is a basic comparison between raster and vector data models. And so you can kind of look at this as the advantages and disadvantages type of thing. So since raster is regularly spaced, you're going to have a lower precision in your graphics. Vector can be placed at any point in space. Okay? Used in traditional cartography, in other words, drawings. No, rasters aren't. They're basically a way to represent things on computers. Vectors are used. Topology doesn't really make any sense. Topology meaning the common boundary being shared. Okay? There really aren't boundaries in raster. There's just cells. Your data is a bunch of cells, and the attributes are the values of the cells. Whereas in the vector data model, your attributes are stored in an attribute table. So every entity in the attribute table can have multiple attributes. Where raster really shines, though, is that it's very good for representing continuous surfaces. Okay? To make a vector data model good for continuous surfaces, you have to do some gymnastics that we'll talk about later. But typically, rasters are better for a continuous surface. All right, and then we'll actually talk about this later when we get into analysis. But basically, there are some advantages to raster in computation because it's set up like a big series of numbers. You can do math on these numbers, and there's good reasons for that. Whereas that's a little harder to do with vector. There's special analysis that we do with vector. We can also talk about that in this course. And typically, rasters are larger, vectors are smaller in file size. But there can be a big exception to that in that, like, let's say you said, if somebody said, hey, I've got every single tweet from the last 20 years, and I've got the geolocation from 20 years. Tweets weren't even around for 20 years, but I've got a lot of tweets, and I've got their location associated with that, that's still going to be very, very large in either data model. When we're talking about individual points. All right. I've used the word data model. And data model means it's an abstract term. It's more general than data structure. Data structure actually talks about the specifics on how it's stored on disk. So less often do we have a discussion about structure, okay? But sometimes it gets important. So it's important to remember that most of this slide talks about data model. We talked about the data model, the coordinate data, the attribute data together. Okay, but how does it actually get put onto disk? Sometimes it's, like I've shown you last week, how many files is a shapefile really? Well, it's a few files. Okay? Well, depending on which data structure gets chosen, it might be 5 files or 6 files, or it may be a directory. Okay. And that's not super important at this point. But what is important is to understand that a data model includes these two parts, the coordinate data and the attribute data, and how it's stored in general. Not how it's actually stored on disk, but in general, we're talking about storing points, lines, and polygons. And we're storing the attribute data in a flat file. In other words, rows and columns of data. Okay, that's the vector data model. The raster data model is that we're storing the coordinate data implicitly because it's an evenly spaced grid of values, and the attribute values are just stored in those evenly spaced numbers, evenly spaced grid, row by row. So we're just storing rows and columns of numbers. That's the different thing. Okay, I showed this on the first day, so it's not super important. But you can convert back and forth, but you'll lose some precision by doing that. Just like in the old days, when you make a copy of a audio cassette, get some noise brought into it. This is an old saying, like even before my time, which means it's really old, right? Raster is faster, but vector is corrector, which isn't corrector isn't a word, right? So the computer really likes dealing with these rows and columns of data. It's good at that. And so a lot of times these are general rules, though. You can always find exceptions. You have really large data sets. But rows and columns of data work really well inside of a computer, so it can do the analysis fairly quickly. Vector, because we're not worried about evenly spaced grid cells and values only occurring at the center of grid cells, we can specify the exact location of an object. Vector, in a way, can be more accurate, or probably a better way to say it is more precise. So these are breakdown. I think we have this down pretty well at this point now. But this is a slide for you to go back and contemplate. All right, we talked about this. This isn't going to be on a test or anything. Okay? But remember, everything in the computer is ultimately torn down to ones and zeros. Okay? And so the data structure is how these points, lines, and polygons are ultimately stored on disk. Okay? And there's not even just one layer of this. Sometimes we can get more specific. And so you know that the computer actually thinks in binary here. And the reason that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows is that 8 sets of ones and zero values what we usually refer to as a byte. One of these is a bit. A bit is an on or off. Is it on or is it off? Getting 8 of those together is a byte. And that's where we get the term like megabyte and kilobyte and gigabyte, is that they're just multiples of those. By the way, how many unique values can you store in 8 ons or offs? How many different combinations can you get there? Anybody know that? Anybody, how would we get it? How many different values can we store in a single bit, an on or off? 2, right? So the way that actually works is it's just 2 to the 8. 2 to the 8th is 255, or 256, right? There's 256 different values we can store in 8 bits. So in a byte, we can store 256 different values. And so in a kilobyte, we can store 10 times that, roughly. Sometimes, depending on who's defining the kilobyte, it's either 1,000 times. It's either exactly 1,000 times that, or it's 1024 times that. 1024 is another multiple of 2. Anyway, so bytes are 8 bits, bits are zeros and ones, and one of the reasons that this does get important is that in each of your data models, when you go to store a value in a computer, oftentimes it'll ask you how many bytes do you want to be available to store that particular value in the computer. So sometimes it won't ask it like that. Sometimes it'll say, how large a number do you want me to be able to store? So we're going to do this today when actually, I don't know if it's today, but in one of the labs, we're going to create attribute data and say, okay, this attribute's going to be a number. You want that number to be between 0 and 256, or 0 and what? Sometimes it'll just say, how many bytes do you want me to reserve for this number? And if you said 1 byte, you can only store a number between 0 and 256. Okay? If you say, I want 4 bytes, all of a sudden it goes way up. Because now we're talking about 256 to the 4th. What's that? That's a huge number. Very, very large number. It's in the millions. Of course, what you're doing is, let's say this is a raster, what you're doing is saying every cell is now going to be 4 bytes instead of 1 byte, so you're quadrupling the size of your data. All right. There are 3 very popular file formats for vector data. These are the coverage, shapefile, and I put file in quotes, because remember last week, it's not a single file, it's a series of files. This is by far the most common format for storing vector data now. Okay? Then there's the geodatabase. And when I say geodatabase, this actually say ESRI geodatabase. A new format introduced with ArcGIS, and it stores your information, and you almost can't really tell. It just makes this folder with a bunch of files that have really cryptic names in it. And you can't tell by looking in Windows what your data layers are, because they're in a geodatabase. You can only tell when you're in ArcGIS and you navigate to that folder, and then all of a sudden it reads what's in the database, and you can then comprehend it. Okay? So this is a newer format, and it has some advantages. But those advantages aren't always needed in every single project. For example, I gave that example about parcels. If I wanted to be able to edit the edge of one parcel and have it automatically make the next parcel grow into it, okay, I can set up rules in a geodatabase that say, if the neighboring polygon gets edited, either send up a message or do something to this polygon. More often, it's just send up a message and then let me approve or disapprove. So it's almost like the data itself becomes smarter. You're allowed to make rules for the data in a geodatabase. Shapefile is not like that. Okay? Shapefiles are just files. That's it, that's multiple files. The coverage is the older data format, and the coverage uses topology. In other words, it only stores a common boundary once. Geodatabases and shapefiles both use the spaghetti data model. In other words, they store common data boundaries twice, but a geodatabase can overcome that weakness that a shapefile shapefile has by being set up correctly. And we have another course on geodatabases if you get really interested in that. Shapefiles, like I said, are the simplest and most commonly used format. ESRI actually open sourced the shapefile, so it's technically open source now. All right, in terms of the raster data model, I don't know how to make that go away. This just says raster data model format. There's the ESRI grid, which used to be a lot more common than it is. Even ESRI doesn't use that mostly to share data. Sometimes people say, my data is in grid, specifically ESRI grid. Basically, every raster is its own folder. So if you were to look at it on disk in Windows, there would be a number folder for every layer. More commonly, raster data is now just stored in an image format because image formats are widely used on computer systems these days. JPEGs are useful, but anybody know what's a big problem with JPEGs? JPEGs are compressed. In fact, there's an algorithm that tries to go through and basically it says, okay, I can make this file smaller if I adjust these values just a little bit, and then I could fit like a kind of a curved wave through them and actually store the function of that curved wave through all the values. If you zoom into a JPEG, sometimes you'll see these like weird star-shaped patterns. It's because the JPEG is storing a bunch of waves through the data rather than actually storing the individual values themselves. And so it compromises some of the values. So JPEGs are okay for storing things like imagery that you only want to use as a background image. However, they're not good for storing values where you want to retain the precision of the original data. What's better is something like TIFF. Okay? TIFFs can be compressed. You can actually choose whether you want them to be compressed or not compressed. But a TIFF is can be uncompressed. So TIFFs. There's other more obscure image formats like .img is another one. Mr. SID is actually another compressed format. It's just a proprietary compressed format where JPEGs are open. Anybody can create a JPEG. Okay. Now, with any raster format, particularly these that have been developed for as just standard image formats, lots of times they'll need a buddy file. It calls it a company world file. And the world file just tells the GIS software where the corner is in geographic space. In other words, it gives a coordinate for the corner, and sometimes it also gives the projection. Just so that when you bring it up in ArcGIS, it can place it in the right position. With raster data, all you really need to know is what projection it's in, where the corner is. So that's the, and also how large the pixels are. Now, there are some formats like TIFFs that can store the geographic information right inside of them. And GeoTIFF is an example of that. So sometimes you'll see a .tiff extension, and you'll be like, well, I think I need a world file to load a TIFF into ArcGIS. Somebody might say, it's a GeoTIFF. The information is stored inside of it. That can happen. All right. Again, this information not going to be a test or anything, but this is helpful because sometimes tessellations are not always squares. Sometimes tessellations can be. The second most popular besides squares are hexagons. Hexagons have the ability to be very close to a circle, but also be arranged so that there's no gaps. That's why hexagons are probably the second most popular. Okay. So that is data model and structure review. And now we'll talk about what we're going to get to today, and that's data entry. So this is a the next chapter in your book here, where we're going to spend the next few weeks talking about collecting spatial data. Collecting spatial data is nothing new. It's been going on for a long time, although the tools change over time. And so it's always something to learn about the new tools created. I'm sure in another 15 or 20 years, there'll be new tools. Although I don't see GPS really going away. I mean, we didn't have GPS when people were using tools like this to measure, basically measuring angles and distances. It's still in use today, measuring angles and distances to collect locations. But oftentimes, there's at least a starting point that's referenced by GPS. Okay. So we collect data now, spatial data now in airplanes. We'll talk about that in this class. Drones, aerial imagery. We go around. This is the other example I talked about before. I could actually take a GPS out. And there are some fancy GPSs that will allow you to not only collect your location, but also allow you to enter some of the attribute data in right there. Okay? And then nowadays, that's progressing into just having a tablet that has software that will let you choose the attribute information. So the tablet's running a full, it's running a full program that will allow you to input that information right on a computer. So we're going to break this down into 3 categories here. We can create our data from manually digitizing from an image or map source. That's the big one we're going to talk about today. We can do it from field coordinate measurement. I believe that's next week. And then we can use image data, which is also one of the weeks. In other words, we can acquire imagery data and turn that into an elevation model or something like that. So field measurement includes older but still in use coordinate survey, meaning that we acquire a single location, but then we measure angles and distances to other locations. And actually internally can be more accurate because every GPS measurement has an accuracy associated with it. And those accuracies can be changing depending on atmospheric conditions and external conditions if we're near lots of buildings. Okay? However, the coordinate survey accuracy has less internal variability. So as we measure those angles and distances, we may make mistakes, but the precision of doing that doesn't change from location to location. So oftentimes we'll collect a single GPS measurement and then shoot coordinates off of that where it's practical. One example of that might be like after a flood. You could go to a known benchmark location where the GPS location has been tied down to be very specific at a particular GPS location. And then just use a coordinate survey device to measure the location of the water at different heights that were visible from that location. Okay, satellite and aerial imagery, talked about that a bit. Okay, so digitizing. Digitizing is this process of drawing, basically tracing things that are spatial already and turning them into digital data. When I was a young undergraduate student, this was done a lot more, what she's doing here, what we call manual digitization. So many of the records that we had were still paper maps. We had geography departments had whole rooms full of these map drawers with all the maps in series for the state. So if you didn't have the GIS data that you wanted, you could go pull a paper map and stick it to a big tablet like this. And this big tablet actually has millions of wires running back and forth underneath the top of the top of the top layer. Okay? And all those wires are sensitive to when this thing that looks kind of like a mouse, but we called it a puck, where that puck is. So if you line that puck up to a certain place, it knows exactly which wire intersection you chose. And you press a button, and it records a location at that point. Okay? Then you have to basically tell it how the wires coincide with real life. In fact, you actually did that first. So you take the map down, and you give it 4 points, and you say, these 4 points that I'm giving you now, I know the real coordinates for them. Here are the real coordinates for those four points I gave you. And now the computer software can translate and know at every single wire intersection what the coordinates are, the real life coordinates of those values. Okay? That's how it was done. You can still do that, but this is hardly ever done anymore. Even if you want to digitize a paper map, there's a different way. Can anybody think of a different way you might get that into the computer? Exactly. You scan it. And sometimes you have to go down to a coffee shop or something. Some big GIS departments have them. You can get large format scanners. Sometimes you don't need the whole thing. Sometimes you just need a part of it, and you can put it on a smaller format scanner. But yeah, you scan it in, and then you do this second thing. The second thing is the on-screen digitization. On-screen digitization means that you draw it from existing data. You draw other features on there. So in this case, we might be drawing all the lakes because we want to get a GIS data or GIS layer that represents lakes. So we go through there and draw all the lakes, and they would come into our database. All right, some of the terms that are on here. Digitize H.1, digitize line segment. Yeah. Combine line segments to create a polygon. This term, minimum mapping unit. We haven't really touched the term scale yet, and we will in a second here, but you should, at this point, you should just realize that if we have, like, let's say we have a map of the whole United States, right? And we don't yet have Mississippi, so we digitize little Mississippi on this map. Okay, it's not going to be as good as if we had a big paper map of Mississippi and we digitized the boundary. So the mapping unit makes a difference there. Okay. So hard copy maps are one reason why we digitize. Okay. This is a little bit of review from cartography class. When we do go to digitize hard copy maps, there are different features associated with it. Okay. North arrow, data pane, neat line, media edge. None of that's going to be on a test for this course, but just so you know. We might have different map types to deal with. Here's a feature map, a choropleth map, a dot density map, where each dot represents a certain amount of something, in this case population, or a contour map, where the lines represent areas where the elevations are the same, or not areas. The lines represent a line, a linear location where the elevation doesn't change. So following that line means the elevation doesn't change. These are all types of maps that you might digitize in. But here you've got county boundaries that you'd be digitizing, and you've got county boundaries here. These individual dots, you should learn, how do those individual dots get created? They might have been created somewhat randomly. It may or may not be a good choice for digitizing. Okay, so scale. We haven't talked about scale yet in this course. And we did it a little bit in the cartography course. But for those of you who weren't in that course, it's important that we have a discussion here. Because some people make the argument that GIS is scaleless. How is it scaleless? Well, when I bring up GIS data, I can zoom in and I can zoom out. And what I'm doing is changing the scale. In fact, when I do that, I know ArcGIS doesn't work on you all's computers right now, But when I do zoom in and zoom out, there's actually up at the top, there's this little thing that's recording what the current scale is. And the scale is just a ratio of the distance on a map to the distance on a ground. So with a paper map, the scale is always the same. But with GIS data, scale changes when we zoom in or zoom out, because what we're looking at is a screen. So we can actually measure the distance on the screen and find out what distance that was in real life, and we would have a measure of scale. This is what I'm talking about when I say, let's just open up the counties. So right here, it's kind of squished. I'll make this bigger. I can't make it bigger. Right here is the scale. I can choose 1 to 1,000, and notice I'm really far zoomed in. Or I can choose 1 to 10,000, and I'm zoomed back out further. And I could manually just add another 0 here. Actually, I guess I can't manual. Custom. Anyway, I can make it larger. If I zoom out more manually like this, where's the zoom out button? There it is. Oh, that's a zoom in. If I zoom out, that changes. See how that's changing every time I zoom? Okay. So this is a ratio. Some people get confused. This is a ratio and it's unitless. So the best way to express scale is as a unitless ratio. The best way to get it so everybody understands. The unitless ratio where we're just saying 1 unit to 100,000 units. In other words, if I measure my computer screen and I find out that it's 1 inch from New Orleans to Hattiesburg, okay? I find out that is 1 inch. Then it's 100,000 inches from New Orleans to Hattiesburg in real life. So the units are always the same on the top and the bottom. Sometimes when you actually create your map for somebody else, you'll create a scale that's one of these. It could be a unit ratio, or it could be a scale bar. Oftentimes you see scale bars. And the reason why scale bars are nice is because you can actually go and kind of measure things on the map. But they're more output devices. They're the end result. In theory, everything starts off as a unitless ratio. Another thing that I brought up in the previous class, but it's important to remember, is that oftentimes people use these terms wrong. Large-scale map is usually a really small area. Sometimes people say large-scale when they mean large area. So as that ratio gets closer to 1, okay, the number is actually larger. 1 over 1,000 is smaller number than 1 over 1. All right. So map scale is a number, the ratio of sizes. So a large scale map is one where the fraction is large. Typically, that ends up being a small area because a 1-to-1 map would be the same size as real life, which would never happen. So a 1 to 1,000 map, though, is still actually, that's. My map campus at 1 to 1,000. In other words, 1 inch on the map represented 1,000 inches in real life. I don't know how far it is to the administration building, but it might be. It's going to be well. We won't do out the calculations, but 1 to 1,000 would be for part of an area, whereas 1 to 10,000, 1 to 20,000, those would be for regional maps, and 100,000 would be for maps that were even bigger than that. Okay? So large-scale maps cover less area but show more detail. Small-scale maps show they're more detailed. Less detailed but show more area. Just the opposite of the large-scale map. And the terms are relative. This map is more detailed than that map. Okay. So this is a smaller scale versus larger scale. Larger scale view versus a smaller scale view. This is this area right Okay, so technically, digital data does not have scale. In other words, I say some people make the argument that GIS data is scaleless. It's true, except for there's still a very similar thing. Okay, basically, GIS data, although it doesn't have scale, it does have a initial grain size that it was created at. In other words, if I digitize that map, that tiny map of Mississippi, and I digitize the larger map of Mississippi, I'd have more detail when I digitize the larger map of Mississippi. So if I brought them both up in a GIS system, you can see that digitization from the larger map would have more accuracy and more precision than the one that was a teeny weeny one, and it didn't. The lines were hard to tell where they were. All right. So we can be zooming in and zooming out, but even with raster data, at some point we'll zoom in on raster data and we'll start to see the grain size of that data where it's no longer accurate. You can derive scale from a map or what you're viewing, but most of the time it's reported in a GIS system. Okay? But if you have any known distance in the data that you're looking at, you can derive the scale. So if you know any distance in there, if you see a baseball field, the distance from home to first base is 90 feet. If you see a football field, the distance from the end zone to the end zone is 100 yards. You can derive the scale just by putting the map distance divided by the ground distance, simplifying out the fraction so that it's a 1 over. And also, at that point, you'll get rid of the units as well. Because if you have units on both sides of the equation, they would cancel out. All right. So, grain size or resolution becomes a surrogate for that. Instead of scale in GIS data, we're talking about grain size or resolution. And then the extent. So another word for grain size is the smallest thing, you can discern and geographically place in the data. Extent is the area covered. So going back to my example of the digitizing a really small map, the reason why there's less accuracy associated with digitizing that little tiny Mississippi is that just the fact that that paper map had the boundary of Mississippi, let's say the line thickness was the same. The line thickness was still like 2 millimeters, right? So the line thickness around the boundary of Mississippi was 2 millimeters, and for the big map, the line thickness was 2 millimeters. Well, on the small map, that 2 millimeter line represented a much larger area in real life than it did on the large map. Okay? And so our grain size is different. We can't discriminate the boundary to any more precision than 2 millimeters in both maps. Well, one map was already much larger to begin with, so it represented a smaller area on the ground. All right, so we kind of covered this. Manual digitization, or digitizing, is what we're going to practice in the lab today. There are programs that will scan your data in and try to automatically extract features. They're kind of cool, but oftentimes there's still a lot of cleanup work to do. And these are really spatial data. Of course, you can scan in text data and try to recover information. Also, if the data is already digital, I guess one way of getting data out of it is doing format conversion, which most GIS systems do nowadays, converting between, let's say, a shapefile and a coverage, or so on. Okay, so manual digitization is the act of tracing these locations. When you do that, it's often best to identify important coordinates. What do What do we mean by important coordinates? Let's say I'm trying to digitize this building from an image. Okay? What's that? Exactly. That's exactly what I mean, the corners. We don't necessarily need any extra points to be collected that aren't on a corner because all the rest of the lines are straight. It becomes a little more confusing or a little more challenging to pick important locations when we're digitizing in something like the Mississippi River. There's probably more important points. Okay? But there are definitely points that are very, very critical when you're making a curve versus in areas where it appears more straight for a little while. And one of the things about GIS systems is that oftentimes there's no curve. So digitizing these things in means that you're digitizing in a lot of points along a curve. Now, there are some editing things, and you might see these, I don't think we do it in the lab, where you can draw a curve and then it will automatically put all the points in. Okay? But ArcGIS, the shapefile, doesn't allow for a curve to be stored. Okay? Only allows for points to be stored, the makeup lines and makeup polygons. All right, so connect the dots with an electrically sensitized puck. That was the old way we do it. Okay. I kind of described this already. I did describe it already. All right. So this is much more common nowadays to use a scanned image to start the digitization process. We're doing this a little bit backwards. We will talk about georeferencing imagery, but the first step is to, once the image is scanned, you have to put it in geographic space. But that is a very similar process to what I described with the paper map, in that you have to give it locations that you know are real locations. How might you do that? Let's say it's a map. Is there a way to do that? Anybody think of ways that we might get the geographic coordinates from a map? Some maps have latitude and longitude marked. That would make it really easy, exactly. Any other ways? One other way would be to identify features that we already know the coordinates of and store them. For example, if it was a map of the whole United States, we could look up what the intersection, four corners has a latitude and longitude associated with it, right? We could look up that location and input that. And there's probably a few other places where at least 3 states meet where the value is known, okay? Or counties. So we could look up that. Another way to do it that's actually pretty common for imagery is, let's say we scan an image in. Well, we could actually go out and stand on some feature that's easily recognized in the imagery and collect a GPS measurement. And then use that measurement to reference the data. We call this georeferencing or ground referencing, using ground control points. So you have to tell the computer the ground control points, and then it transforms the image to be in geographic space. Which, like I said, we're going to combine this with talking about collecting imagery. So we'll do this later. For this lab that you're going to do today, this step will already be done. Then you'll digitize the feature boundaries and you'll make your edits and be done. All right. If I click in here, why doesn't this go away? Oh, here. There we go. I don't know how that happened. So, digitizing from imagery, it is important that you have an image that you know is in geographic space. And it can't just be, let's say I went up on top of the arch in St. Louis. I grew up in St. Louis. Well, I lived in St. Louis till 11, so that's what popped in my head. And I took a picture, right? Even if I was pointing pretty straight down, would the scale be the same in the entire image? No, it'd be different. problems with doing that. And so getting an image where the scale is the same throughout the image requires some specialized software. Oftentimes, a GIS specialist will get that data already processed, taken with specialized cameras that create an image, what looks like an image, but it's actually already in map coordinates. So that's kind of the approach we're going to be taking today. Based on coordinates. Oh. We can also digitize from maps. When we digitize with maps, we don't have to worry about that. Maps are already spatial data, and of course, when we digitize, we're not going to get a surface that's any more accurate than what's there. But if we trust the accuracy of this map, ours will be, assuming that we do a good job digitizing, will be as good as that map. I mean, there's error associated with it, of course. So doing digitization is fairly low cost. It doesn't require us going back out in the field and collecting more data. But we are relying on the quality of the maps. And we're relying on our effective skills of not getting bored and getting the exact line in there. So it can result in poor quality maps. Basically, training somebody on how to do this is not that difficult. It's pretty easy to do. We can pretty easily tell how well we did. And it works on almost every GIS system in any device. Okay? The disadvantage here is there's an upper limit on precision. We can only be as accurate as the map itself was, and our process itself can be bad. These are really the same as these, but they can be thought of as disadvantages in some ways because. Well, somehow that got. Anyway, poor quality maps. I listed this as a disadvantage. Yeah. So this slide looks like it got a little bit messed up. Okay. So don't throw out everything. Low cost is definitely an advantage. Okay. The poor quality maps is definitely a disadvantage. And short training interval is definitely an advantage. I'll fix the slide out. But device ubiquity is definitely an advantage. Ease and frequent quality testing is definitely an advantage. Basically, digitization is great because we can use existing data, and therefore it's cheaper. It's not so great because there is an upper limit on how accurate we can get it, and it depends on existing data. So there is the one thing, the existing data thing, that is both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage because it's cheap. It's a disadvantage because we're limited by the existing data. And we're not creating our own data, going out in the field with GPS and getting, or a coordinate survey, getting a higher accuracy. I'll fix that slide up and repost it. Okay. Here's some. We kind of repeating stuff. But here's some problems with source maps. We're basically going into detail as to how we could mess up, or how the system could mess up in creating digitization. If your map is old, and this does happen, maps shrink. They have holes in them, which sometimes can obscure where exactly a feature is. That can mess up the boundary. The cartographer, when they created the map, oftentimes the cartographer took a little bit of license. They might have simplified a line to make the line look better. Maybe that river boundary was not meant for you to actually find out where the river was. It was just in a general idea, this is where the river is. And so the river itself is an abstraction of reality. And therefore, if you digitize off of that map, and that purpose of the map wasn't to get the exact location of the river, the cartographer made a decision to simplify the line, you're amplifying that and including that in your data. This is really the same thing as this. Features are generalized. In other words, the cartographer makes decisions and decides, hey, this line, I'm going to symbolize this as a really thick line because it's a really important road. Well, all of a sudden now, if I'm going to put that into a GIS system, that thick line is harder to determine where the actual center of that line is. And so we've messed something up by simplification. Classification, we may say these two wetlands are both wetlands. Well, if we're digitizing, we may want to know some more information about different types of wetlands. One might be a marsh, one might be a swamp. I know there's lots of different versions of those. The actual printing process could have moved things off, and then some things get exaggerated. Oftentimes buildings are shown on maps larger than they are because sometimes it's just important to show that the building exists, particularly on like USGS quads, like these. These are buildings right here. Sometimes those are shown a little bigger than they are so that they show up on the map. And then also, when you digitize, you're digitizing from a map that does have scale. I kind of already went over this, but this line here, you could make a more precise line than this line here, which is wider. This is slides from the cartography class showing how in real life the road might be offset a little bit more or less from something, but cartographically it looks better to do it like that. Or the cartographer might just say, oh, we don't really care about these individual boulders, we just want to show that this is some sort of park space and it has boulders. Simplifications occur in cartography all the time, and those types of problems will present themselves in your final digitized map. Look for generalizations. You're going to make those kind of decisions when you go to work and you're asked to find all the green space. Well, somebody's little long counts green space or green space just that size of an area. You need to come up with a way to determine exactly what constitutes an area that's going to be separated off as a separate location. When you do digitize, sometimes there are slightly different terms associated with different types of points. A vertex is just any point along a line. Okay? And a vertex needs to be, you need to put a vertex in because, like I said, it doesn't store curves. You need to put a vertex, more vertex in when there are curves, less vertex when there are straight areas. A node is somewhere where the line intersects with another line. And oftentimes, even in the spaghetti data model, what that means is that you need to make sure that your node in this polygon, or this line, whether it's a line or a polygon, probably a line. So you need to know that this point is stored in this line, and it's stored in this line. But if you actually want those two lines to intersect, you need that point and that point to be exactly the same in the system in both of those lines, in line 1 and line 2. And the way that that's often done in practice is called, it's in the lab, it's called snapping. So you can turn snapping on, and snapping, what it'll do is, if you get close to any other line, any other vertex that exists out there, it'll snap those together so that you can, there'll be nodes. There is accuracy associated with digitizing. Different researchers have looked at this problem. So the error does tend to be normally distributed. In other words, people usually digitize pretty close to the real line, so the real location, and some fall off in either direction. All right, these are some common errors when you go to digitize. This is probably the most detrimental or problematic. If you don't use snapping, this is exaggerated. If you didn't use snapping correctly, you might have two lines that were supposed to touch, and you undershot one of them. Now, this is exaggerated. In real life, if you had this zoomed out so you're looking at the entire area, these may appear to be exactly in the right place. And it might not be that big of a deal until you try to use the data to find the quickest way to get from here to here. The GIS system can do routing. So if these weren't connected, it would route you all the way around here. Or if these were parcels, and you created, you call it a sliver if you, in parcel terminology. You get two parcels that almost touch together, but then it's quite, you create this sliver of who knows who owns that land. So you've got undershoots, overshoots, slivers. Whether the slivers slivers could result in two polygons overlapping, or they could result in a gap. Okay, that's why snapping is important. Some of these other ones are, you've got a dangling node. In other words, you digitize this one out, and for some reason you clicked here, but then you clicked again, and so there's this extra line that doesn't really exist. Double clicked out here. This happens. A pseudonode means that you created a line here and a line here when this really didn't need to be it. There's no reason that this needs to be two lines. This is one record in the database. We refer to that as a pseudonode. You can add extra points. Those are some examples. Even if you make errors, GIS systems allow you to go back and, for example, turn snapping back on and grab this guy and snap it back into that. GIS allows, and there's also some automated tools, and you could basically set thresholds and say, anytime I got two nodes or 2 points at the end of the line that are within a meter, go ahead and make them the same. And you can run that through as a tool, and it will do that. Okay. So it does take time, but some of it is automated. We're going to leave this rubber sheeting here for a second until we'll talk about that when we do imagery. Okay, so here's an example of maybe modifying, doing some manual editing. You can remove a feature. You can go in here down. You'll see this today when you do things. Okay, snapping is in here. I thought it was. So we haven't talked a lot about attribute data, but when you go to edit the attribute data, sometimes you can have the computer only store certain values, so you can keep it consistent. With snapping, you can choose oftentimes whether you want to, if you want to make it snap to any point along the line, that's called line snapping. If you want to make it snap to a point, it will only snap to points. And you can also tell it, hey, I want to snap it to this other layer that I have loaded, but I don't want to snap to a different layer. So snapping is really interactive, and you can decide which layers you want to snap to and which layers you don't want to snap to. So here's snapping. If you didn't snap versus if you did snap, you get some errors. This is automatic snapping, which is different than interactive snapping. Both of those are on there. No. Okay, so this would be, you can turn on snapping so that when you're actually digitizing, it's snapping as you go. And then if you make any mistakes, you can go back and do interactive snapping where it says if there's anything within a certain threshold, snap them together. These two get snapped together. This wouldn't get snapped together because they aren't within a certain threshold. Distance. Obviously, you can have too few vertices or too many vertices. There are line smoothing algorithms. So there's two different ways to approach this. Like I said, there's the system where you can go through and digitize a line, and then, draw a curved line and have it put in the dots. There's also a system where you could digitize a line, and then have it smooth out that line for you. Line smoothing algorithms inside of ArcGIS. There are ways to make your data less complicated by line thinning. In other words, let's say you digitized a bunch of things and you've got too many vertices. You went through and created so many vertices that your file size is really large. You want to make it smaller. There are algorithms for thinning out the vertices. All right. As I said, there are often problems where you'll get data from one data source and then you'll make data from a different data source. Particularly with like Mississippi state boundary, there could be an issue with the boundary being different in one set of GIS data versus another set of GIS data. And there are a few different ways to solve this problem. One way is to redraft the data based on which source you feel is more accurate. It is possible, kind of like a graphic editing program inside of ArcGIS, to cut it in a different location and then insert the boundary that you think is more accurate. But it is good to do these sorts of things so that you get consistent data in your GIS database. There are automated scanners. Okay. Really that's difficult though for a computer to do a very good job at turning a map into vector data like that quickly and do. Sometimes it can find all the purple things on the map maybe, or all the green things on the map and turn those into polygons. But it involves some supervision. So typically you're going to be the person that goes through and finds that, manually digitizes those points in. All right, we're gonna not talk too much about. This is we're gonna skip the automated scanning part. It's very rarely effective. All right, we've only got a few minutes left in the lecture here. Actually, I'm gonna leave this till next week because this will be better next week anyway, or maybe the week after. I'll combine this with the imagery part. All right, so let's. I'll take that back off and put it on a different week. Let's take a break now. I'm going to try to get the ArcGIS stuff working here. It may take me 10 or 15 minutes, but let's take that break and then we'll do the lab.
No, he doesn't ever like.
Yeah. He says, oh, he does. I didn't see those before.
What did you say?
Like,
Because for this class, you can tell. There's so much. Or if they do, they know. Or if they're in. It's nothing but right.
We have a local admin, but as soon as we join the meeting, the only thing that we can do.
I wish they were both. I wish they were both.
Once we leave the domain. That's what I did.
Or
left with the name.
I'm sure it's the one that did the commercials for this? Oh, wow.
Anybody have up the computer? Or your computer just for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so the address that it thinks it is 131-95-62-153.
I do live over.
Was it something like,
About 4 years.
right,
Yeah.